We have some pretty extraordinary guests here today, and really looking forward to hearing their views and having them share their thoughts with you. Earlier this week and last week, we had Sam Query and Ali Risk, as well as Nick Bollettieri and Tennis Sanguine. So if you missed those, they're on demand for free at myutr.com. Go check them out. And I'm sure you guys will appreciate. They're just tremendous tidbits of wisdom and knowledge that have been provided in those. So please do chime in there. Okay, I see people coming in here. The other thing I want to let you know about is that we have a live chat as part of this. So feel free to check in on that there. It should be on the lower part of your screen, and feel free to ask questions. As we get to the middle to back end of this, we're going to be opening it up for questions. Many of you have submitted questions already, and we look forward to taking those and then also taking some live questions. So while you're settling in here, we're just going to tee up a little video about UTR powered by Oracle and how it's changing the game of tennis. And I'll be right back after that.
There is a movement building in tennis, a groundswell that is changing the game, redefining who we play, how we play, and bringing fun to the sport in a whole new way. It isn't about who you are, where you come from, or your age or gender. It's about passion and love of the sport, about the will to improve, about community, competition, fun, and friendship. In local communities all around the world, this movement is creating new opportunities that make tennis, well, universal, equal, open, inviting. This is Universal Tennis. Want to join us?
Welcome to the UTR Powered by Oracle All Access Series. This is a free we also have your own virtual event. You can be it paid, and all the proceeds go back to you. So check out on myutr.com. Continuing our All Access series, we now have, please do check those out. And of course, really exciting guest, which is Corey Goff. So I'm sure there's going to be lots of pearls. Here we are today. So today we have an extraordinary group of two guests. The first one I'd like to introduce is Dr. Jim Loehr. He is the world-renowned performance psychologist. And like Nick Bollettieri, his impact and is so profound here that we want to tee up to show how impact and teachings in all.
Part of the content development team at the Youth Performance Institute. Renowned performance psychologist, national bestseller, The Power of Focus has achieved worldwide recognition, leading national publications, including Harvard Business Review, Business Week, and Time Magazine. He's appeared on NBC's Today Show, CBS Sunday Morning, and The Oprah Winfrey Show. From his more than 30 years of experience and applied research, Dr. Loehr believes the single most important factor in successful achievement and personal fulfillment is the strength of one's character. He's learned that character strength can be built in the same way that muscle strength is built, through energy investment and focused effort. Dr. Loehr has worked with hundreds of world-class performers, including 17 #1 in the world athletes from a diverse arena of sports, from hockey to boxing, from Olympic speed skating to tennis. He's worked with elite FBI anti-teams, the Blue Angels and Navy SEALs. The intent for YPI is to apply the knowledge Dr. Loehr acquired over nearly 4 decades to the complex challenges faced by youth today. It was during the 6 years he served as the Director of Sports Science and Sports Psychology for the Nick Bollettieri Tennis Academy that he developed his understanding and commitment to help young people acquire the skills required to truly succeed in life. Dr. Loehr possesses a master's and doctorate in psychology and is a full member of the American Psychological Association and the Association for Applied Sports Psychology.
Wow, you guys are in for a treat today. Get out your pencils and your paper and get ready to take down some notes. But before I tee up Dr. Loehr, we are also incredibly fortunate to have a second guest tonight and my co-host in this. He's a former collegiate and ATP player. He's a coach, a mentor, an entrepreneur, a technologist, and a philanthropist. He's the founder and creator of CourtSense Program and Academy, one of the absolute best programs in the world for developing young players and teaching coaches. He's a leader in sports science. He's been honored by the United States Olympic Committee as well as the USTA. And he's been an advisor and consultant to folks like Novak Djokovic and has worked on the coaching team with Christina Mihail, who became a number 22 player on the WTA Tour. Above that, he's one of the most accomplished and capable and liked people in tennis. He's remarkably private and humble, but he's a constant student and teacher. He's a gentleman with a true passion and conviction. And the greatest compliment I can give him is that I enjoy every conversation and minute I spend with him because he makes me a better person, more charitable, more thoughtful, more kind, while motivating me to have more conviction and purpose in my own mission, which is to help make tennis better. I treasure him as a friend and as a mentor, and I'm proud that he's joining us here today. But before we tee up Dr. Loehr and Gordon, we also have a guest video here that just want to say a couple words about Gordon as well.
Hello guys, this is Novak Djokovic. I would like to say a few words about my dear friend and my brother from another mother, Gordon Uehling. We go back over 10 years, almost 15 years. It was one of the first times that I was playing US Open. I met Gordon through mutual friends in tennis, and ever since the very first moment, ever since that year when we met, he's been taking care of me as his younger brother, and I have always observed him as my older brother and someone that is mentor in my life, someone I can always rely on at times when I need an advice or I just need a good laugh. And so his traits and his character is something that is truly special and rare to see. He's a very, very dear person to me, to my wife, to my entire family, to my entire team. He will always be in my life, and he will always be part of my team. So I love you very much, Gordy. And now let me say a few words about him as an innovator. His passion and his love and dedication to this game is truly remarkable. He's one of the most motivated and dedicated people in tennis that I have ever met.
Well, if that didn't get your attention, Novak was nice enough to send that to me this morning. He's over in Spain, obviously managing through this crisis like everybody else. He actually is going to be watching this broadcast, and he's thrilled and excited to support Gordon as well as Dr. Loehr. So without further ado, let's introduce our two guests here. If they can come on to the video.
Mark, you're killing me.
Well, that was a surprise video for you, Gordon. So I didn't mean to start you off crying here, but believe it or not,
and I was like, you can't do that to me. This is kind of surprises. Whoa.
Well, I actually sent Novak a thing, would you send me a 10 or 15 second video? He sent me a 5-minute video, and I had to unfortunately cut it short because it would take the whole show up. But wow. It just speaks to the great admiration he has for you, Gordon, and the great friendship you guys have.
It's so well deserved too.
You know what? It's pretty wild. I mean, I feel very humbled to be on a call with Dr. Loehr, and the fact that Novak took the time to do that, and to be here with Mark as well, who I think is a remarkable human being and is doing incredible things for tennis. It's a special group. It really is.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, guys. We probably have 1,000 folks tuning into this. We have parents, we have players, and we have coaches. And but before we get started, just first of all, how are you guys doing? Where are you? How are you each sort of dealing with the COVID situation?
Well, first of all, thank you, Mark, for having me on this program. I hope I can add some value. And I'm not sure what crime I committed, but must have been something because I'm in solitary confinement. I'm in house arrest. I'm not allowed to leave my house. So I'm not sure what the crime was, but it must have been pretty serious.
And I'm in the same, I think we're all in the same boat, Doc. This is a challenging time for sure. And hopefully in this segment, we can give people some insights and things to think about.
Well, great. Well, let's jump right in. I think, today is really the opportunity to talk about performance. Performance is a broad category and a broad definition. And what we really want to get into sort of how can coaches and parents and players themselves help themselves in their journey to enjoy tennis, become better tennis players, and perhaps more importantly, become better human beings with purpose and confidence and character. And so that's really what the agenda is today. And I think both in terms of the tremendous work that Dr. Loehr has done, but also what you've been doing, Gordon, in doing the next gen and really trying to combine these pieces together. So let me start with you, Gordon. Give us a little bit of a sense of what you've been doing with Court Sense as a leader and as an innovator.
I'll start from the beginning. Many years ago, I met Dr. Loehr almost 30 years ago. I can't believe the time's flown so quickly, but Arthur Ashe introduced me to him in 1991. I was a hockey player. That was my primary sport and always loved the game of tennis. And I came down there for 3 days with Steve Goldman, who's my first coach. So if he happens to be watching, hi, Steve-O. And in 3 days, it just blew my mind what I was learning from Dr. Loehr. And, just a little backstory on me. I grew up with dyslexia and school was difficult, but sports were always so easy. I was an art major. I loved education. I was an education major. I just loved teaching and helping people. And the insights he was giving me, just my head was blown. I couldn't believe it. And I just felt like it's something that I wanted other kids to learn someday. And that's why we're starting a non-for-profit called Youth Performance Institute. But it's wait till you hear Doc speak. I mean, it'll be very clear why you want to get your pencils out, and the way I parented, the way I created our program with Court Sense, insights that I've maybe given Novak over the years is so much based on the mentorship of Dr. Loehr. And he's influenced so many people in so many ways.
Well, thank you for Gordon. We're going to get into some of the amazing things that you're doing in terms of pushing the envelope with sports science, with technology, and integrating those people together, particularly with young people and developing their game. But let's flip it over to Dr. Loehr. That video was amazing. We really enjoyed the short shorts there back in, back in the day. And of course, the work with Nick Bollettieri. Maybe we should just start off and talk a little bit about your journey into sort of performance psychology and even those early days there when you were working with Nick and obviously around tennis players of such great capability as he had in those early days.
Yeah, it's been an unbelievable journey for me. And I continue to learn. I still am just intoxicated by this area of human performance. And it's one of those things that I don't think there's any end point. And I feel like the more I know, the more I realize I don't know. It's a very complex, and the ground is moving all the time. But the most prolific period I had in my entire professional life was the 6 years I spent at the Bollettieri Academy. We had the most prolific player development in the history of the game with so many of the greatest players ever. And my arrangement with Nick is that I had access to all the players. I could I'm a data guy. I love to collect data. I love science. I love research. And for the whole time I was there, I still have boxes of data that I collected, and I did a lot of computerization, and all the insights that I really finally came to in those early years came from that opportunity. And every book I've written really represents another kind of peeling back the onion skin of a little more understanding. And I'm really excited about where it's all moving and the kinds of things we can do now that I only wish I knew when I started what I know now, because we can do so much more with young people, and the path to getting better and more skilled at your ability to be the best that you can be in whatever your chosen field. We know so much more, but we've had a living laboratory at the Human Performance Institute that we spanned almost 3 decades. We had over 300,000 people. We collected more data on all of them. And that has been, for me, a gift that has helped me distill things that hopefully I can share with others and actually help them along the way.
Well, I'm excited to get into a couple of those things. I've obviously read up a little bit, and I've looked at your books, and some of these one-liners you have are just mind-blowing. I mean, they're so profound in the statements, and we'll get to those in a little bit. But I would be remiss if I didn't start still back in the days of Nick Bollettieri and maybe ask for a few anecdotes or a few stories. I mean, to have a laboratory like that, to have exposure to those types of players, that type of capability, you know, a lot of people asked us and pinged us about question, but look, what are common themes here? What was it about those players that made them break through all the different challenges on the mental side of the game? You know, what were commonalities? Were the hurdles the same? Were they very different? Did you take different approaches with them? Give us a little bit of a sense, because I know you spent time with Jim Courier and Monica Seles and some of these wonderful, wonderful players. And I wish I could put up a grid too, like we did with Nick Bollettieri, but because your list is as profound, although some of those are private. So we decided not to do that.
It's
but
quite a list.
Perhaps share with us a little bit some of the things you learned in those early days and some specific stories.
Well, one of the things that as this began to unfold, you know, I wrote a couple books in the beginning on mental toughness. And so I was really trying to figure out, distill, to what extent does the mind play a role in the human performance output? And exactly what does that mean? And how do you measure it? And how do you get inside that space between people's ears? And ironically, which is a little embarrassing for me to say, that the more I learned, the more I realized that I had to kind of backtrack, and that mental toughness is not just mental, and that it's biomechanical, it's physical, it's emotional, it's mental, and it's also character driven. And so it's a lot more complicated. So I'll just give an example. You can, you know, if you're a player and you're double faulting always under pressure, someone's going to call you maybe a head case, and you need to go see somebody who can work that out. It's very possible that the reason you're double faulting is that service motion doesn't allow you enough degrees of freedom, so that when you get a little tight, you simply can't get the ball over. And the problem is not your head, it's the faulty biomechanics. So a lot of the mechanical issues people have are actually contributing to a really difficult time mentally and emotionally. And then on the physical side, you can choke, so to speak, if you don't get enough blood sugar, if you don't get enough sleep, if you are fatigued. There are 1,000,001 reasons on the physical level that you're not going to be able to perform at a really, really sharp mental level. So that's another issue. Emotionally, if you have problems with anger and frustration, and you have a brutal private voice, those also contribute to undermining your ability to perform at your best. And it really is not just a mental thing, that's an emotional barrier. And then you have this issue of the story you tell yourself, your private voice, your ability to focus in the moment and stay present as opposed to going forward or in the past. And that's more mental. And then you have the character thing. And the last one is the one I've spent the last decade, something that I completely knew nothing about. Nothing in my training as a psychologist brought me to that point. But all the data we collected, we began to realize that who you are as a person in terms of your character is probably the single most powerful predictor of the success you'll have long term. You can win certain matches, you may go to a certain level, but who you are as a human being in terms of your ability to perform in both what I call character skills and ethical and moral skills actually provide the greatest foundation for mental toughness.
Well, that's a lot of wisdom right there over decades of studying, and we're going to get into the character one, but just to recap here, I mean, what you sort of talk about are 4 pillars here: a physical, an emotional, a mental, and a character layers here to performance. And I think obviously you've written about this, and I strongly encourage people to go look at your books as well as obviously look at the videos on this, because it is nuanced and it is complicated. Now, I do think today we're going to get into some of the various teaching things and techniques as well as we're going to open it up for questions. So please do keep your questions coming, because we are going to open it up. so many people out there, talk about this mental toughness thing, Dr. Loehr, right? And part of that is the mental piece. And Gordon, we'll talk about how you try to work with your players to instill mental toughness, because part of it is also on the court and resiliency and conditioning. But like, are players truly limited, or is it that anybody could become mentally tough? You find that there is degrees of playing. You talk about this being a muscle in some ways, right? So
exactly. Well, let me just start with this. This is how I view it now, and I hope it makes sense. You wonder if we look at, let's say, Roger Federer's forehand. It's a marvel. It's almost like, how does he do that? It's almost like it's completely abnormal. And then you look at Novak's movement. Yeah. And that is so abnormal. It's like, it's not normal for people to move the way Novak does. Or Rafa's forehand down the line. It's so abnormal. And so is a great competitive brain. You cannot be normal and be really a great competitor. It's an upgrade in your brain that has to be worked constantly. You don't roll out of bed with just this incredible, unless you've been around some extraordinary people that help you build the skill sets that enable you to stay focused in the moment, not get really down, and be able to manage mistakes well, to have a great attitude, have optimism, give your best effort no matter what. All the things that we talk about, those are very abnormal. What's normal is when you miss your fifth or sixth break point, to go furious, to go crazy, and to get upset, throw your racket. That's normal. But you're not going to be normal and be one of the best players in the world, and you're not going to be a great competitor and be normal. So it's like you have to work the territory. And when you look at how many balls, how much work did Federer have to do to get that forehand? There was repetition that was almost unending. You have to do the same with your brain. Your brain has to have those repetitions so it becomes automatic. Same with Rafa's forehand down the line. How much time does Novak spend with his movement? It's unbelievable. It's absolutely unbelievable. And that's what makes a great competitor. You have to realize you got to work with that brain. And that's what we're always trying to figure out. What are the best protocols, the best things people can do to make them stronger as a competitor? Because the game is so much more fun when you're able to bring your level of play to what you know you're capable of.
One thing I'd like to mention, Doc, is that you taught me at an early age when I was 19 years old, because I thought recovery was weakness. And you taught me this concept of stress and recovery. And I'd love for you to expand on that, because, and I'll mention a little story. And I know Novak is watching, and Nole, I hope this is okay that I mentioned this, but I remember asking Nole about 6-7 years ago. I said, Nole, what is your secret? Why so good? And he looked like this, he looked this way, he looked that way. He goes, I recover better than everybody else. And you know what? It's so true. I mean, the stretching, the massages, he wears his booty off. He has the oscillation, really incredible work with something I find in junior development, and a lot of parents and coaches, they overtrain the kids, and they don't get they don't allow their bodies to recover, their minds to recover, their spirit to recover, emotionally recover. Right. And that's where it becomes very challenging. So Doc, I don't know if it's okay, but I'm a co-host here. I figured I'd ask you to expand on that.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of the great breakthroughs that we had. And most of that came in the early days of Bollettieri's. I had everyone hooked up to heart rate monitors, and we put them under stress. And we saw how some people actually handled their heart rates would come up. And then between points, if they were really handling the pressure well, there'd be a very nice drop, almost a heartbeat drop every second. And there'd be a very nice kind of wave form, a very rhythmic waveform of what was happening. I began to call it as oscillation between the stress, and then the between point time is actually your opportunity for recovery. And the fitter you are, physically, emotionally, mentally, and even spiritually, the faster you recover. And so we began to train the mechanisms of recovery to help you to be able to deal with stress. And what we began to realize that stress is always going to be there. And that it's really your speed of recovery that is actually the most important element. So making waves, as we call it, is really the key to everything. When you're in a very tough situation, as far as linear stress, you've got to break it up. And Novak is 100% correct. He gives 100%, he trains hard, but then he finds ways, very ingenious ways, to recover, to reignite his passion, to find solace and a sense of, I'm back, I'm ready to go. And we no longer look at rest as wasted time. There used to be this idea that if you're a great athlete, don't waste time, taking all these breaks, because breaks are for wimps. Mental toughness means you just charge through and just move everything right to the side and carve your way to the top. And nothing could be further from the truth. That's why the schedule you keep, the number of tournaments you play, the way you manage a match between points. I spent a good bit of my career looking at the between point time and how we can help players manage that with unbelievable precision to help them achieve their ideal performance state. And so it is true. All of life is there's the pulse of life is the oscillation between stress and recovery. And the more linear our lives become, the more dangerous they become. Either on the low side, where there's no stress at all, or linear stress where there's no recovery. And so our whole key is, to being a high performer, you have to understand how to oscillate.
And I love the analogy you'd always use, Doc, with an arm being overused and you end up hurt, you pull a muscle, or if you don't use it at all and it's in a cast, it atrophies. Getting either too much is where you're in trouble, right?
100%. And that's where you're building capacity, is actually every time you stress a muscle or stress the brain, it actually is a stimulus for growth. That's the stimulus for all growth, is stress exposure. And the growth actually takes place during recovery. So after a run, when you recover afterwards, the growth is actually occurring later. And without the stress, there is no growth. And without the recovery, there's no growth. So stress and recovery are the most basic principles of how life works.
So maybe in the context, there's so many people out here listening to this, and it's phenomenal, but they also ask themselves the obvious question, so how do I make that relevant to me? And so this notion of trying to figure out how to create and simulate stress, the notion of getting into repetition, the notion of figuring out how do I create over and over again situations that frankly replicate what I face in a competitive match. Are those some of the things that people should be trying to do? Jordan was famous for saying and yelling at his teammates when they didn't practice with 99% intensity. He says, you can't practice with 60% and then suddenly go to a match at 95%. Like, it just doesn't work. You got to train the mind and the body. Help make this a little bit more relevant to the player out there about how differentiated should their approach be, and how do they think about creating this environment for themselves that improves their ability to handle fear, anxiety, stress, nerves, anger, and the like.
So we are creatures of habit. Our body loves habit. Most of who we are is really occurring in this almost unconscious, subconscious realm of just almost doing it automatically. So you can't be all that creative under pressure if all that you've been doing is very different than what's happening in an actual competitive situation. So the more you can make your practices very similar to the way you are going to experience something, and whether it's in the same court, whether it's with players you don't like to play, whether you're playing against cheaters, when the brain also, if you visualize this as a situation where I'm actually in a final here and I really got to come forward with my best stuff, and you can put that pressure on yourself, your body begins to mobilize for that. And then you begin to develop routines for handling it. As I said, between point, for really, I spend an enormous amount of time working with players and their private voices, helping them to coach, to become the best coach they will ever have in terms of how they speak to themselves. And that takes repetition over and over. I have them spend hours journaling to get that executive function in their brain aligned with the competitive arena they're in, so that they become an amazing coach. They become their own Yoda, in a sense. They don't look outside themselves for answers. They look within. And that takes a lot of hard work. So The most important thing you can do to get really tough in a match is to prepare yourself for that. Preparation, preparation, and preparation is everything. And there's preparation visually, there's preparation, you know, in terms of the physical dimension, with your posture, with the way you walk. I call it the matador walk. We know that a lot of these things actually trigger changes, very subtle changes in the neurochemistry of the body, and actually begin to enhance your ability to be those things in those critical moments. So if you practice lazily, if you don't put a lot of heat on yourself, if you kind of get a little bit lazy with your thinking and self-talk and throwing your racket, and then you go into a high-stress venue and you expect to be something very different. That's not how the brain works. The brain is always on, always listening, and you're going to get back what you put in.
Amazing, amazing stuff. Let me shift a little bit to practices. One of your dear friends and mentors of yours, Gordon, is Jose Garris, and you know, true gentleman, Pepe. I mean, he's just one of the greatest human beings on the planet. Love him to death, and he talks about what is a great practice. And for those who are listening today, write this down because it's not what you think. His idea of a great practice is punctuality, respect for who you're playing with, your coach, engagement, and effort.
And purpose. And purpose.
Well, and so that gets linked into those things. Those are the four things, right? So in the end, what you end up talking about here is, hey, it wasn't about whether I hit a good forehand or whether I won a particular set. It's about factors that all tie into purpose. So when you're working with your juniors and when you're trying to create, hey, look, how do you instill that high level of intensity and focus? What do you preach, Gordon? How do you, and do you convey those thoughts that Jose has?
Oh, absolutely. Jose, he's one of the mentors I was going to mention today. I mean, he's been such a huge impact on my life. Dr. Loehr and Jose are probably the two biggest mentors of my life for tennis. And it's been an incredible journey, you know, helping so many different kids and coaches and building teams. But I'd say the one thing that's super important is not the winning, but it's the purpose of the practice and what you're trying to accomplish. And you know, so many kids sometimes are focused on the win, and it's not about that. It's about the process and process versus outcome. And you know, I'm sure Doc could explain even in more detail about that than I'm explaining. But I find that, you know, even with my own kids and the kids we have working, if they're focused on the win, then all of a sudden character flaws start happening. You know, it dominoes a little bit versus saying, you know what is it what's my purpose? What's my vision for my game? And am I doing the best I can? I find effort and purpose are the top of the list. I always ask for, and character traits of being, you know, kind and respectful and all that.
It's interesting. There's one of the great top 10 players who, was Tim Mayotte, and some would argue that he was, and I don't mean this as he'd say it himself, he was the least talented, longest reigning top 10 players of all time. And you sort of would ask Tim, like, well, how did you do it? And from the days at Stanford, and what he talked about is every single practice he had, he made relevant to how he was going to compete in a match. Yeah. You see juniors and players all the time go out on a practice court and they're just hitting balls. They're not working on anything that has relevance to what's going to happen in that match. And I think that sort of reinforces what you're saying, Dr. Loehr, which is the more you can create shot patterns and various things that mimic competitive situations, the more you're building on your ability to execute. Would you agree with that, Gordon and Dr. Loehr?
Absolutely.
100%. That's exactly how the brain works. And the more you develop those neural pathways, whether they be motor pathways or those pathways that serve these character strengths, that's exactly, you've got to practice exactly what you want to have manifested in those critical moments.
Yeah.
One of the things that is really an interesting area that takes you right into this whole notion of purpose is this notion of self-esteem. And everybody wants to have self-esteem. And the literature on this and what we learned in all of our stuff over so many years is that low self-esteem is a problem, but so is high self-esteem. High self-esteem is so often you think you got it. You have the sense, you know, it actually opens the door to arrogance. And, you know, you always believe that you should beat everybody. And it's just what we're looking for, what is really the essence of really a strong person is what I would call stable self-esteem. And we learned that the way in which that is developed, we have a question. It's really interesting. We have people write down what they believe are the 6 words that describe themselves when they're most proud of themselves. So they write those down, and they're quite surprising to them when they look at them. But this is when you are best, when you are your best under stress, who are you? And then we ask them at the end of their life, how do they want to be remembered? What are the 6 words that they would like to be remembered for? And what they are actually astonished, if we have a group, they all pretty much write down the same things. And the things that they're most proud of themselves for and how they want to be remembered at the end are the same. The scorecard that we're using for self-esteem, nobody says, I want to be remembered for being number 38 in the Eastern section, or I've won this many tournaments, or I'm number 5 in the world, or anything else. What they really want to have are things that so often we never put on the scorecard. Things like kindness, or possessing integrity, being honest, a truthful person, compassion for others, empathy, someone that you become a great friend, always engaged, always give their best effort. And what we learned was those are controllable. If you put your self-esteem in things like winning tournaments, on what your world ranking or your ranking is, on how you're doing as far as beating certain people as a benchmark, you don't have control over those things. The things that actually matter in your life, you have control over. And those are the things you've got to put your energy into. And that's what leads to what I would call stable self-esteem. You can lose a match, and you don't like losing for sure, but you have the feeling that you gave your best, you did what you could, and you got beat on that day, and you can still live with yourself, and you don't live and die by things that actually you have no control over, which makes you an addict to keep playing, because you're always trying to build the belief in yourself that you're worth something, and you're chasing something that never works.
Interesting. There were a lot of questions that came in about, do people who excel and become champions, is it that they love to win? Is it that they hate to lose? Is it that they're thinking about a different matrix? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, the research on this is quite interesting, and it kind of corresponds to what Gordon was saying there as well. And we found that the best single predictor of the success you'll have, and this is actually looking at just about every variable there is drive. How passionate are you? What is your sense of, I'm not giving up. I'm going to make this happen no matter what. And regardless of how many obstacles or challenges you face, you have the sense you're a calling. There's a calling to do this. And the more that this adventure that you're in is really not connected solely to you and to your self-interest, the more you're going to fight for it. So we've learned that the drive is the single most powerful predictor of success. And when we repurpose tennis to become a better, stronger human being, and to actually be better prepared in the world, and be better for other people and make a contribution to the world, I mean, you almost can't harness it. It's almost it can't be broken. And so what we've learned is that drive is everything, and that's purpose. Why are you playing? Let's get the purpose right. And if you get the purpose right, so many other things fall into place, and all the injuries and disappointments and bad losses can be contained. They're just simply an obstacle in your path, and you are not going to surrender.
Well, go ahead, Gordon.
I was just going to mention that I mention this to kids all the time, that, you're the driver of your car, and we're just a bunch of mechanics. As parents, as coaches, we're there to, make sure the tire's filled and the springs are working, the engine, but you got to drive the car. And, sometimes I find that parents or coaches are driving the car and the kid doesn't want to be out there. And I'm like, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. And I've actually convinced kids out of playing tennis, and people say, wait a minute, you're in the tennis business. I said, no, I'm in the passion business. It's all about driving the car and wanting to drive the car. And by the way, I can see your child doesn't want this. They love figure skating, love piano. I'd love to go to a recital, and I go to it, and then they maybe find their own passion, and then they find the drive within them. And so I couldn't agree more to Doc about drive. I mean, it's key.
Yeah. Well, one of the great quotes that I've heard you say, and this ties back to resilience, is that the strongest way to build resilience is to have purpose, right? And then the other thing I've heard you say is suffering is optional, and is pain without purpose and meaning. if you're purpose, you can control suffering.
Exactly.
That's mind-blowing stuff right there, right?
Yeah, that actually is a Viktor Frankl understanding that he suffered so much, and he saw so many people suffer in concentration camps, and those that suffered the most, viciously in those situations were people who could put no meaning to the suffering. His meaning was that he wanted to tell the world about what he was going through, and it was hopefully would never happen again. So he was not going to surrender, and his pain never went away, but he no longer suffered. And I thought, that is a remarkably brilliant comment.
Yeah. Well, I want to pivot a little bit to talk about a couple other things. One thing I will mention that I think is super helpful here. A lot of people worry about how to manage on-court performance, anxiety, stress. You've written on the 16-second cure. I want to move on, but I encourage everybody to Google that, because I think it's really amazing stuff. I think probably the best practitioner of that I've seen at the program is probably Maria Sharapova, when you watch her go to that back wall and clue out. But it's really about how to manage yourself in between points, refocus, get calibrated, relax, and prepare for the next point. But I will defer your comments on it, if that's okay, Dr. Loehr, because what I'd like to get to is that there are a lot of parents out here as well, and there are a lot of coaches out here. And we hear the horror stories, and there's so many parents and frankly coaches who aren't that experienced about how to handle youth, and they haven't gone through it 6 times, so they haven't made the mistakes and learned from their mistakes. If you had advice on what is the perfect tennis parent, what is the way to handle your child and their journey to instill love and passion, what tips and guidelines? And I'd throw it up to both of you guys, because you're both dealing with it in real time.
I could tell you my short answer, and Doc could get into the science behind it, but I find that a parent should be a parent. And really trusting somebody else to do a lot of the work on the tennis court, because to me, it's being a parent is unconditional love, and being a coach, there's conditional love. There's I remember working with Jose in the past. I was lucky enough to work with him for a few years, and he would say, I don't have much time now. I got to go be with my horses. And that was his way of saying in a very nice way that you're just not doing what it takes to be with me right now. And, you can't do that as a parent. Like, I'm just going to check out. But as a coach, it could be very much, right? So I think that's such an important thing, that a parent is there to talk and see how they're doing emotionally and how they're feeling physically, and check in. And Mark, my God, I'm going to turn on you. You've been an incredible parent. You have 2 kids that are playing at Harvard right now at tennis, and the things you've done with your parenting. And I'm sure you had other people you trusted with them, and you're there to kind of reflect, talk philosophy, talk about psychology, and kind of say, these are some challenges you're having. I could hear that in your voice. You're really struggling with your coach, or you're struggling with this situation, but stay positive and keep going at it. I think that's the way that, Doc, I don't know if,
No, I totally agree with that, Gordon. And I wrote a whole book called Training Parents for Competition. And the whole idea is that parents have to be trained just like the players do. There is the player, there's the coach, and then there's the parent. And the parent has a role on this team. It's very well defined, and they have to walk a very narrow path. They're not going to generally be the coach. You can replace coaches, you can change a million things out, but you can never change the parent. And the parent is the most important, element here, to try to make sure that this is a good experience for their son or daughter. And if the parent doesn't have the purpose right, if the parent believes this is a chance for their son or daughter to be a star, to become wealthy, and to have this great opportunity to go on, parents just get caught up in all the glitter and all the money they're spending and everything else. They're really looking for a return on this. And so many instincts that they have are contrary to what we really know is in the best interest of that young boy or girl. The most important thing, and you mentioned it, is that you be the mother or to be the father. And, there's no one can replace that. And the caring and the love, you're not out there to do anything but to help them grow up and become a better human being in the chase to become a tennis player. So the question as a parent, you want to always ask, who is my son or daughter becoming as a consequence of the chase to become the best tennis player they can be on planet Earth? And if they're not becoming a better, stronger person, someone you're really proud of, that they're putting in great effort, great attitude, that they have great sportsmanship, that they have more discipline, they're more focused, they're likely not going to become world-class players and make a living at it. If that's like 1/10 of 1%, what they're likely going to do is to use all the experience that they had as a tennis player to become better in everything they do for the rest of their lives. And they'll probably get their kids involved in tennis. But in the beginning, the pressures on parents are, you'd almost rather go out and play as a parent. When you watch your kids play, it's excruciating. And very often you get upset because you think that they're just not doing what they've been trained to do. And so you come down on them like a coach might. And the damage that you can do in that situation is often irreparable. So you have a role to play your role. The player has a role, the coach has a role, and the parent has a role. And of all of those, the parent is the most important.
And you're almost better off at times if you don't know much about the game. I mean, you look at some of the champions.
You're much better off.
Yeah. And then the ones that really understand the game, that's where it can get dangerous because they get awfully emotional and they can't see as objectively as they need to.
One of the acid tests to determine if you're a good parent, if you're adding any additional pressure on your kids to do well, that is, you're moving into the realm of being a problem parent, to actually behave in a certain way and so forth. And so the test for that is if they like to have you there present when they are performing. If you're adding more pressure, they would rather have you not be there. And so that tells you that you're not just, you should be a cheerleader. And the only time you ever step outside that box is when they do something you believe violates a lot of the issues of sportsmanship or ethics or anything around cheating or acting like someone that you really feel like is not in the best interest of them becoming a more mature person as they grow up. But if your kids don't want you there, take note. It means you're probably adding more additional pressure.
Well, I want to make sure we get to some questions here. I mean, we could go on for hours here. This is such fascinating stuff, but we love hundreds of questions coming in. And so, but one last thing before we go to that, Gordon, I just want you to talk a little bit about sports science and technology. I think that, you know, some of the things you've been at the cutting edge of here and just share with us some of the thoughts. You've really been building the next generation to develop players and help with coaches. Talk for a minute or two about this.
Sure. I mean, PlaySight has been a big part of what we've done in our program. And I think Dr. Loehr really believed in it. And to be able to see yourself, again, I named our program Court Sense. I didn't want it to be named after me. I wanted it to be much bigger than me. And Court Sense is, you know, using all your senses. So the visual from PlaySight is just tremendous. You also look at, you know, there's a couple of people that are big mentors. Jose Garris is one of them. Obviously, Dr. Loehr. Carlos Cano is in our program, who is, you know, technically incredible. But there's a guy named Dr. Peter Gorman. The tennis world doesn't really know about him, but he is somebody who, you know, and Mark, you know him a little bit, and so does Doc. He is so bright of a sports scientist. He works for the Navy SEALs, and I mean, so many names I probably can't even name in the Major League Baseball. And he's doing stuff in the cognitive world. And that's where I think it's really interesting because Dr. Loehr is in the mental part of this world, but it's really, it's being able to think and react. And there's some technologies that he's a part of. There's another guy, Dr. Mirzanich, who I haven't been lucky enough to meet, but he's teamed up with him and he's created some technologies that blow my mind. And we've been using it in our program. And the whole thing is being able to see something and then react. And a lot of the time we're doing a ladder drill. We're doing it at our own pace, but it's really looking at how you do, you know, around you and horizontally, vertically, all these different directions. And you know, Dr. Loehr could also talk a little bit about this as well, because I think it's really a breakthrough. The Navy SEALs are using it, the military, and it's based on a posit science. There's another technology called Brain HQ, and it's for $100 a year, which isn't bad at all. You could have 800 different games, and you're working 7 different regions of your brain. And they've spent over $150 million on research and development, have 180 published papers to prove that you're not only are you getting good at this, it translates to sport, it translates to academics. To me, to not have this in one's education is crazy, because what happens is if you don't think quickly, you don't react quickly, right? So the brain is what tells the body to go. So, you know, Dr. Gorman would talk about basically as if you had a weight vest on you. You might be fast, but if you had a 50-pound weight vest on you, you're not going to go nearly as quickly. And that's where the mental is a big part of it. Doc, I don't know if you want to expand on that at all.
Well, I mean, the brain is a muscle, and the brain is, this notion that the brain has great neuroplasticity is absolutely true. This Dr. Mrsenovich is one of the leading neuro researchers in the world, and they came up with this. The thing that really attracts me, that's why one of the reasons I loved PlaySight was because it's face the truth, immediate feedback, and we need feedback. The more immediate the feedback, the better. But what I saw with part of this new technology is this light system.
And it's called Witty Slim, just to mention. Yeah.
Yeah, where it's training the neural signal to be activated with movement. So you see a light and you're to move in a particular direction, and you have 4, 5, or 6 lights. And I will tell you, you are working the brain so hard. You're also working the body. So you're working the neurocognitive realm, the alertness, response time, and you're also working the motor pathways that correspond with that. And the more you work those pathways, they will be translated immediately into results in whatever sport you're in particular tennis, because that's what tennis is. So it's those are some of the new frontiers. And I think Gordon has always been attracted to technology. And I think it's one of his great, really great characteristics as a coach is he's always on, the scent of something that's going to be really helpful, but not overly complicated, but is something that's science-based that can help his players. So I've always admired this in Gordon.
And one of the things I love to say to people is sports science plus the art of coaching equals magic. And there are a lot of coaches that don't really understand the science as much, and they're effective, but are not nearly as effective. There's others that are scientists, but don't understand how to look at somebody's body language and how to really motivate them in ways. When you combine the two, it becomes really exciting.
Well, a lot of people watching this, sports science can be expensive, PlaySight can be expensive, different technologies. I mean, one of the things that you are working on, Gordon, which is trying to create these breakthroughs and these ideas and these thoughts, and to make that available to the masses. It's something that people can access on a reasonable basis. But the notion of visualization, the notion of seeing video, whether it's on an iPhone and the like, understanding the nuances of the game, that is the future of the game, right? It's about data, it's about analytics, it's about visualization. This is about taking performance on top of the mental parts of the game. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I mean, it's everything. And it's like Dr. Loehr said, it's physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. And you got to look at all those if you're going to be building a champion. If you're focused on just one, you're in trouble in today's game.
Let me turn to some questions. I forgive me for having waited so long here. People have been sending things in here. Let me just open it up here. There are a slew of questions, and Gordon or Jim, just jump on whichever ones you like here. So Emma writes in, is it the quality of training or the quantity of training or both?
Can I raise my hand on that? I happen to be lucky enough to be with Mats Wielander because he lives out here in Sun Valley, Idaho, and that's where I am right now. And he was talking about the other day, he said, growing up in Sweden, he didn't have much court time. So it was quality. And we were talking about the other day. I mean, there are a lot of kids out there 5-6 hours a day, and they lose their purpose. They can't have that kind of focus during that long period of time. He would have that hour. It was gold. Every ball had extreme purpose. So I would completely 1000% say have purpose and get out of there and get some recovery and then go back to purpose again. I don't know, Doc, if you want to expand on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, that is exactly what in neuroscience we know, that you want to practice with great precision. And as soon as you get fatigued or start losing it, you actually start developing competing pathways that will at some point may come back to haunt you. So the best, rather than practicing for 3 hours, you're better practicing for an hour and a half with unbelievable full engagement, knowing exactly what you want, and try to eliminate as many unfortunate mistakes, correct them and move on, and you'll get much further down the road. It's not how many balls you hit, it's the kind of preparation and execution that using the entire system that will determine the pattern of growth.
Marcus wrote in a question here, which is, do you approach coaching differently for boys and girls? And if so, at what age does that approach change? And I guess this is for both of you, right? Because there's sort of the drills that I like, and there's also the mental part of it. So, thoughts on that?
Doc, do you want to go? Or I can mention that girls physiologically mature quicker and their brains are, adapt a little quicker at the younger ages. So, the maturity levels there, we find versus boys. I think in terms of girls, they also, they really you want to make sure you listen to them and you're emotionally connect with them. But it really depends on the player. I mean, you can't really box anybody in saying everybody's the same, so it's really understanding each individual. I don't think it's boy or girl necessarily, but it's getting to know, do they need a little bit more strict boundaries, or do they need more like, giving them a pep talk and positive energy?
Yeah, I think what Gordon is saying there is that, the developmental, process is often quicker for girls. So they actually often have the ability to handle more, get stronger and so forth. And it's interesting with UTR, you have all kinds of age groups, male and female playing each other. And that adds another very interesting dynamic psychologically. But I think it's extremely important, if you've ever coached a women's team versus a men's team, you recognize that the women they really are more sensitive to a lot of the things that are happening, and you have to tune into them more. The way their whole hormonal system works, they have a lot more issues that really need to be accommodated for and understood to be a great coach. And so there are factors, growth, developmental cycles, and so forth that have to be factored in. And a great coach is tuning into an individual and treats them as an individual and understands that no two people are the same.
Yeah. There were too many names to mention individually around this, which is, how do you deal with things going the wrong way in the middle of a match? Right? You zoned out for something. The wind is there. You had a bad line call that the opponent made. You get really, really angry. You're coming up on a tiebreaker and you lost the last 4 tiebreakers you played. What simple rules, techniques, ideas, if any, can you give to players out there, coaches out there, to help people manage through, the frustrations and the stress?
Doc, I'm sure you would talk about rituals on that one, no?
Yeah, I mean, the most important thing for me is that the idea that I recognize I'm not performing at my best. What are the things I have control over? And I go back to the things that have always been kind of the strengths that I can bring forward in a storm. And there are always things that I can control: my body language, my effort, my attitude. I need a reset here. So maybe at the end of the first set, it was a complete washout. I lost 6-0. You stop, you reflect, you take a deep breath, and then you kind of rehearse how you want to bring yourself out again. Maybe some changes tactically or strategically, but most importantly, you understand you can control a lot of the factors. This is an opportunity for you to build resilience, to build toughness. You're actually in a situation, if you can come back here, imagine the confidence you're going to get here, as opposed to beating yourself up and realizing you're having a terrible day. And go back to the scorecard that matters. And when that scorecard you get A's, whether you win or lose, you're going to feel like, hey, I'm making progress. Even though I lost to someone I shouldn't have, I'm building a portfolio of strengths that will help me for the future, not just in tennis, but for the rest of my life.
So many questions came in from people around this notion of, okay, I know I shouldn't be results oriented. I should be process oriented and growth mindset oriented. And that's all good and dandy, but I haven't won a match in like 3 weeks. My dedication is not really matching up to the output. Like, what words of comfort or sort of encouragement can you give to coaches as well as to players about how to manage through that journey and maintain their purpose?
This happens to every single athlete. I don't care who they are. If Novak is listening, the #1 player in the world, all the way down to someone who's just getting started. This happens to every human being who's involved in any sport, and in particular tennis, where you get yourself in a tough situation, you're losing, you can't quite find the sweet spot. And what you have to understand is this is totally normal. And that you have to find a way to really solve the riddle. And so what I like to do is to create a story around this, a great story number one, that faces the truth. I'm not playing well. I'm not really I can't find my, this really special place inside myself. I'm kind of out of sorts. And then you try to look at what are some of the things that you have control over that could possibly change this dynamic. And then you try to identify, what is the story that takes me where I want to go here, that gives me a sense of hope, that inspires me to work harder in practice, that allows me to make changes in things that I need to. And how much of this is stuff that I've brought on myself, that I need to kind of make some adjustments with myself, and write that story out. And that story should inspire you, give you hope, face the truth, and give you some ideas about how to take action for tomorrow's practice. And you keep working at it, knowing that eventually you will break through. And when you do, you will have more confidence in yourself than you've ever had, because you just broke through one of the most difficult times ever. This is often precipitated after a player is pulled off the playing circuit, when they have injuries, when something really they've gotten sick, and now they're trying to get back, and it seems like it's impossible to come back. But once they're back, they're stronger than ever, and it actually was a gift. The things that have pushed us the most have often helped us the most to build confidence and belief that we can, in fact, endure and get through this.
Well, I mean, that's some mind-blowing stuff there. I mean, one of the things I know you've talked about, one of your favorite quotes is, "History will be kind to me, for I intend to write it." And of course, that's a Churchill quote, but that says a lot about what you're talking about, which is, paint your purpose, paint your story, and then get conviction behind delivering on it. Well, look, I could go on for another hour, and remarkably, hardly anybody has left this thing, so people are still tuning in. It's wonderful. But any closing comments or thoughts here before we come to a closing?
You know what, Mark, you had asked me to just write some technologies and so people can refer to us. I'll just put this up for a second. If anybody wants to just refer to technologies that I think are really quite special, that could help player development at a younger age, all the way to a top player. There, I didn't mention the Playmate ball machine, but that's also that there's a time and space for that, where you can store all these different drills and then be there as a coach next to the player. But it's been for me an incredible opportunity to be on this with you and Dr. Loehr, people that I really adore, and the fact that Novak had done that video, it touched my heart. I mean, I literally was I was sobbing a little bit behind the scenes, and I was like, oh my God, they're gonna go live with me. I can't handle this. So it's a really, really special moment and time for me. So thank you.
Well, Dr. Loehr?
Yeah, I would just say that, tennis has been a gift to all of us. And if you get the purpose right for why you're playing, and that is the most important part of your life as a tennis player, whatever level you are in, I would say that the most important thing is that you begin to realize what a gift this is in terms of helping you develop and become a stronger human being in all dimensions, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, in terms of character. So that one day you'll look back and you'll want to give this gift to your kids, because you realize that this sport is unbelievable in terms of presenting challenges and all kinds of obstacles in your way, and you have to rally all kinds of resources in yourself, focus, full engagement, give your best effort, attitude, and all of these things require great inner strength. And when you recognize what a gift this game of tennis has been to all of us, you'll really understand when you're in the middle of it, this is a gift to me, because when I rally myself against this, I'm going to become stronger and better, not just for tennis, but something far more important. And when I'm out there in the real world, I can look back and say, tennis was one of the great gifts of my life, and I will be forever thankful. As long as you have the purpose right, this is the greatest game there is. It's the greatest gift you can give another person.
Oh my God, this is mind-blowing stuff. I hope people have, this is going to be available for free on our myutr.com. I hope people go listen to this 10 times, because every time you listen to it, you can pick up something new. I think these are amazing insights from two magicians in the game. And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your thoughts. Purpose, people, character is more important than any other dimension, and lots of ways to win, but the most important is to win with character and lose with character. So just remember that, if you remember nothing else. And So we're going to wrap this to a close here. Thank you so much for your patience. We got another webinar coming up next Tuesday with Coco Gauff's father, as I mentioned. And then next week, we also have Lendl, Yvonne Lendl, as well as Jez Greens and others. So please stay tuned and tune in for those. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Gordon, for having this time and our wonderful relationship over so many years.
Yeah, that's great. Amazing.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.